Welcome students to the lecture on sustainability and marketing, values and objectives. With me here I have Professor Dr. Frank Martin Belt, who will answer the questions that I've accumulated during the time that he was giving the lecture. So firstly, I would like to ask you to reiterate the term on brand ethos, which you spoke about in your lecture. What really is brand ethos all about?
Well, first of all, I would say it's a key term regarding sustainability marketing values and objectives. And as I said in the lecture, it reflects the core values of the company in the brand itself. But I would say it goes beyond that, and it has two different sides. You might have a look at brand ethos from a perspective of the company and sustainability marketers, how they want the brand to be and what kind of values they want to infuse into the brand. So especially in sustainability marketing, they want to attribute social and ecological value added to the brand, as I explained by the example of Natura, for example, or Body Shop, or the Toyota Prius, and so on and so forth. The other side, or the other dimension, is how brand ethos is perceived by the consumer. What kind of feelings they have towards the brand and what kind of values they, as consumers, attribute to the brand. So, for example, in the case of Nike, many have a very positive attribute to the brand into sports shoes and apparels. And the others are very critical about the brand. So although Nike wants to infuse social and environmental values and enhance the brand image, for example, by means of community programs like Let Me Play, some consumers may not go along and have a totally different perception, claiming Nike for not going far enough, for not having a credible and transparent certification system for the suppliers, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is that brand ethos has different dimensions and different perspectives. And that's the modern view of brands, actually. The perspective of the marketer, the company on the one hand, and the consumer perspective on the other. And that's true in the context of sustainability marketing as well.
Okay, that clarifies the point. And I was also wondering, secondly, what would be a strong incentive for marketing decision makers to have a sustainability agenda?
Very good question, an interesting question. I would say there are monetary and non-monetary incentives for sustainability marketers to follow this path and to push sustainability brands, products and services. Some companies have a sustainability vision on the normative level, on the ethical level. They have a written statement saying, we believe in this and that, and we want to push the sustainable development. We believe in it. And yet, when it comes to their incentive structure, how they pay their people, especially brand managers, product managers, or category managers in the case of retailers, they often simply pay them according to economic goals, to increase revenue, to increase profit and market share, customer loyalty, and so on. So there's a gap between the vision they have and formulate in written statements and the incentive structure in the company. And often this leads to contradictory results. And yet there are other companies, like the Swiss food retailer Coop, for example. About 10 years ago, actually it's 20 years ago, they started their sustainability journey. And about 10 years ago, they also have a sustainability vision, a mission. They included it in their ethical normative foundation. And at the same time, they also changed their incentive structure. So all of the employees, including the sustainability marketers or the entire marketing department, well, they still have economic goals, but they also have sustainability goals. So, for example, a category manager in the food assortment would have one goal to introduce at least one new sustainable product or brand per year, and also to increase the revenue of the sustainable product assortment each year as compared to the conventional assortment. So I would say Coop is a good example for changing the incentive structures and giving employees an incentive, to a monetary incentive, to implement sustainability strategies and values. In addition to that, non-monetary incentives do matter, and we have to take them into account. That means the values in the company, the culture, how they treat it. So one question would be in marketing would be whether sustainable products are perceived as alternative kind of products, whether they are perceived as niche products, or whether they are perceived as mainstream products, and whether you want to make something big out of it. That would be a cultural value. And depending on your perceptions and the statements in the company, it might make a difference for sustainability marketers. So in short, I would say both monetary and non-monetary incentives are important, although in the end of the day, for many employees, economic and monetary makes a lot of difference.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, in the beginning of your lecture, you talked about inside out versus outside in, where you introduced how mostly people are concerned with protecting the environment, taking care of it, and yet we kind of ignore the impact of the environment towards us, where it can react and backlash onto us. I was wondering if there exists a link between these two. Isn't it that the environment backlashes as a result of our failure to take care of it? So if you could elaborate more on it.
Yes, so that's the relationship of human beings towards the natural environments. And if we look at the history of human beings, I would say it changed over time. I mean, like a couple of thousand years ago, nature was something wild and merciless. And over time, especially due to modern technologies, we as human beings emancipated ourselves. We detached ourselves from nature, starting in the medieval ages and the Renaissance. Nowadays, I would say, in a sense, we even live apart from nature. When you consider our climate-controlled buildings, or at least many of us do in affluent societies. The paradox is that especially the global consumer class and affluent societies, they use up most natural resources, and yet it's the less fortunate, the poor people, the people in need, which suffer the most from a wild and merciless natural environment. When we talk about hurricanes or natural disasters in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh and so on. I would say the relationship between the two perspectives and the relationship between human beings and the natural environment always is and has been ambivalent. So nature is always has to be preserved on the one hand, and yet it's wild on the other. It's just important to make that explicit, to think about how we perceive and think about nature and how we communicate it. And it has strong implications for sustainability marketing as well. If you think about sustainability communications, for example, how we advertise our products when we put it in a natural environment, in a romantic, living in harmony with nature and so on. So I think it's very important to at least reflect upon it and then think about, as a sustainability marketer, what kind of message you want to convey and the underlying meaning of sustainability advertising or communications.
Okay. And also moving on to the objectives part of your lecture, you said that marketing decision makers should aim to set measurable and time-related goals. But then again, the environment is very difficult to quantify and to measure. What are your thoughts on this existing conflict?
Very good question. As I said in the lecture, some ecological dimensions are easy or easier to measure. Take, for example, air emissions, water use in liters, or the waste in kilograms and so on. These are the kind of dimensions you would consider in the life cycle assessment according to ISO 14040. And yet there are other environmental dimensions like the beauty of a landscape, aesthetics, which are more difficult to measure. The same is true for social issues. A minimum wage or the hours of absence and leave, these are measurable indicators. Whereas, especially in the social area, it's sometimes rather difficult. Nevertheless, I think within the corporation, especially sustainability marketing, it's always important at least to try to measure the ecological and social impact and to follow it up over time, as companies do in sustainability reports according to GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, and at least try to combine that with customer value. That is to say, the customer loyalty measured in purchases or repurchases and so on. But all of these are measures you can at least try to include in market studies and find out about the interlink between ecological, social value measured in terms of emissions or wages and so on, and its impact on customer value perceived by the customers.
Okay. And my last question, moving on to the case study that you presented later in your lecture, you showed a company named American Apparel, and this organization, you said it portrays itself as a sustainable organization in the way they deal with their employees and they set their goals. But then again, you showed the other side of American Apparel, which showed employees advertising the apparel, but however dressed inappropriately. My question then is, would you really say it is the fault of American Apparel, given that they're competing in the fashion industry, which is trend-based, and yet to keep up with competition, you need to adjust to these trends? Would you really say it is their fault for trying to keep up with competition in the fashion industry?
Okay. Actually, I didn't imply or I didn't say that American Apparel uses obscene advertising. I would like to raise this question, and I think, and I didn't even say that it is a sustainable company either. What I tried to say was that they have a different business model, vertical integration, and that they have a number of environmental and social initiatives. But I would also say they are far away from a sustainable company. And when I said, well, they introduced an organic cotton line, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's about 1% or 2% of the revenue. The question is, what about the other 98% of cotton products they sell? So I neither said it's a sustainable company, nor did I say that the sex advertising is good or bad. Talking about the sexually charged advertising, I wouldn't say they adjust to something. I would rather say they push the limits. They really trying to find out where the limits are of advertising. And although I'm rather liberal, I wouldn't call it obscene or anything, but as I said, it's certainly sexually charged, and some might be offended and think it's goes beyond the limits and it should be forbidden. Others, especially the younger generation, might like it a lot and don't think much about it. And yet, that is their main target group. So I would say raising awareness for the brand, they do a good job. The question is, which I wanted to raise in the Sustainability Marketing Challenge, the case study, was whether it really, in the long run, whether it's really good for the brand ethos of American Apparel.
Right. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And on that note, I have come to the end of my questions. Thank you very much for your answers. And thank you, viewers. Students, hope you've increased your understanding from this. And as for now, I should say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.